The phone fell from my trembling hands, clattering against the hospital floor tiles. My heart monitor spiked, its steady beeping accelerating into an urgent rhythm that matched my panic. A nurse rushed in, her concerned face swimming before my tear-filled eyes. "Mrs. Caldwell? Eleanor? What's wrong?" How could I explain? How could I tell her that the text message I'd just received was from my own son, the same son who had abandoned me in a strange city just 3 days ago, and that all it said was, "Mom, I'm sorry." I had no choice. Please don't try to contact me again. But to understand how I ended up here broken, betrayed, and utterly alone, I need to start from the beginning. From the moment that changed everything. "Mom, let's go for a drive. I want to take you somewhere nice." Those words from David warmed my heart as I sat in my faded armchair by the window, watching the afternoon light filter through the curtains. At 62, with my arthritis flaring up and the chemotherapy leaving me perpetually exhausted, I hadn't been out of the house in weeks. The cancer diagnosis 6 months ago had shrunk my world down to the 4 walls of our Cincinnati home, the one I'd shared with my late husband Frank for over 30 years, and now occupied alone, save for David's increasingly rare visits. I looked up at my son standing in the doorway. At 35, David still had his father's strong jawline and those same hazel eyes that could charm anyone. But lately, something had changed in those eyes. They'd become distant, always darting away when I tried to hold his gaze. He'd been checking his phone obsessively during our brief conversations, his responses becoming shorter, more irritable. But today seemed different. Today he wanted to spend time with me. "That sounds wonderful," I said, setting aside the romance novel I'd been reading, the same one I'd started 3 times but couldn't seem to finish, my chemotherapy-fogged brain refusing to retain the plot. I reached for my purse hanging on the coat rack. "Just let me get my medication first." "Don't worry about it," David said, jangling his car keys impatiently. "We won't be gone long." I hesitated, my hand frozen midway to the kitchen where my pill organizer sat on the counter. The oncologist had been very clear about the importance of taking my medications at the exact same times each day. "David, I really should bring them. What if we get stuck in traffic? Or what if—" "Mom," he cut me off, his voice sharpening. "It's fine. We're just going for a quick drive. You worry too much." I swallowed my protest. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had become too obsessed with my illness, too focused on medications and symptoms and side effects. Maybe what I really needed was a break from it all, a few hours to feel normal again, to be a mother spending time with her son rather than a patient. "Okay," I conceded with a smile. "Let me just get my sweater. The evenings are still chilly." David checked his watch. "Sure, but hurry up, okay?" I made reservations. Reservations? My spirits lifted even further. It had been so long since I'd been to a restaurant. Since Frank's death 3 years ago, my social life had dwindled to almost nothing. And after the cancer diagnosis, even my weekly bridge club had become too exhausting to attend. I moved as quickly as my aching body would allow, pulling a light cardigan from the hall closet and slipping on the comfortable loafers Frank had bought me for our last anniversary together. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror by the front door and barely recognized the woman staring back. My once dark hair, now gray and thin from chemotherapy, was covered with a floral scarf. My face, always slender, had become gaunt, with deep shadows under my eyes. I pinched my cheeks, trying to bring some color back, and applied a light coat of the lipstick I kept in my purse. "Ready?" David called from the driveway, already in his car with the engine running. I should have recognized the warning signs. His impatience, the way he kept checking his watch, how he avoided answering my questions about where we were going. But I was so happy he wanted to spend time with me that I ignored my instincts. The instincts that had served me well for over 6 decades suddenly fell silent in the face of my desperate hope that my son still cared. I locked the front door, running my fingers over the familiar brass knob that Frank had polished religiously every spring. The garden he'd tended so lovingly was beginning to bloom daffodils pushing through the soil, their yellow heads nodding in the light breeze. I made a mental note to ask David to help me weed the flower beds soon. I simply didn't have the strength to do it myself anymore. David's silver sedan gleamed in the driveway. It was new, I realized. The last car I remembered him driving was a used blue Honda with a dent in the passenger door. When had he upgraded? And how could he afford it? As a high school history teacher, David had always complained about his salary, but I pushed the thought aside as I carefully lowered myself into the passenger seat. "This is nice," I commented, running my hand over the smooth leather interior. "Is it new?" David merely nodded, backing out of the driveway without looking at me. He flipped on the radio immediately, turning it to a sports talk station and raising the volume just enough to discourage conversation. I settled back into the seat, trying to ignore the knot of disappointment forming in my stomach. "It's fine," I told myself. "He's just focused on driving. We'll talk at the restaurant." But as we drove further from my neighborhood, through parts of Cincinnati I barely recognized, that knot began to tighten. New high-rises and shopping centers had sprung up in areas that had been vacant lots the last time I'd ventured this far from home. The city was changing, moving on without me as I remained trapped in my cancer-enclosed world. After about 30 minutes, I noticed we were heading toward the interstate. "Where are we going?" I asked, raising my voice slightly to be heard over the radio. "It's a surprise," David replied, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "You'll see." Under different circumstances, with a different tone, those words might have been exciting, but something in David's voice sent a chill through me. Still, I tried to stay positive. Perhaps he was taking me to that Italian restaurant in Kentucky that Frank and I used to love. It would be a long drive, but the memory of their tiramisu almost made me salivate. The car ride stretched on, mostly silent except for the radio announcers debating some football trade I knew nothing about. I watched unfamiliar neighborhoods pass by outside the window, then stretches of farmland, then small towns I'd never visited. We'd been driving for nearly an hour. "David," I said again, more firmly this time, "where are we going? I'm getting tired, and I really should have brought my medication." His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "I told you, it's a surprise. Can't you just enjoy the ride?" But it was becoming increasingly difficult to enjoy anything. The pain in my hip was intensifying, a dull throb that would soon become a sharp stabbing if I didn't take my prescribed painkillers. And worse than the physical discomfort was the growing anxiety gnawing at my insides. I checked my phony and old flip model that David had insisted was easier for me to use than a smartphone. No service. Of course. Frank had always handled our cell phone plans, and after his death, I'd simply continued with the bare minimum, rarely leaving the house enough to need reliable coverage. The digital clock on David's dashboard read 4:47 p.m. My evening medications were due at 5:00. I'd already missed my afternoon dose. "David, please. I'm not feeling well. I need to take my medicine." "We're almost there," he said, but his voice lacked any warmth or reassurance. The interstate signs indicated we were heading east, toward Pennsylvania. My confusion deepened. What could possibly be in Pennsylvania that David wanted to show me? We had no family there, no connections at all that I could remember. Eventually, after another 30 minutes that felt like an eternity, David exited the highway. The small town we entered was unfamiliar, with faded storefronts and peeling paint. He drove slowly down the main street, then turned onto a side road lined with strip malls. The buildings looked tired, like they'd given up trying to be attractive decades ago. He pulled into a strip mall I'd never seen before. The storefronts were a mix of pawn shops, check-cashing places, and vacant windows with "For Lease" signs plastered across them. A few people lingered outside a convenience store, smoking cigarettes and eyeing our car with mild curiosity. My stomach dropped. This couldn't be our destination. Not for a nice mother-son outing. "David," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "what are we doing here?" He parked the car near the convenience store but kept the engine running. "Wait here for a minute," he said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "I need to pick something up." Relief washed over me. So this was just a quick stop. Maybe he needed cash or wanted to buy something for our actual destination. "I can come with you," I offered, reaching for my door handle. "No, Mom. Just wait in the car." His voice was firm, brooking no argument. "I'll be right back. If you're enjoying this story, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything, and sharing this video helps our community grow. Now, let's dive into this emotional journey." I nodded, settling back into my seat. Through the windshield, I watched David walk away, his tall figure moving quickly across the parking lot. Instead of entering the convenience store as I'd expected, he disappeared around a corner of the building. 5 minutes passed. I turned off the radio, the sudden silence amplifying the sound of my own worried breathing. The pain in my hip flared, and I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. 10 minutes. I checked my phone again. Still no service. I looked around at my surroundings, really taking them in for the first time. Beside the convenience store was a payday loan establishment with bars on its windows. Next to that, a liquor store with neon beer signs flickering in the gathering dusk. Across the street, an auto parts shop had already closed for the day, its metal security gate pulled down. 30 minutes. Panic began to rise in my chest. I tried David's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. "This is David. Leave a message." His voice, so businesslike and distant, offered no comfort. "David, it's Mom," I said after the beep, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm waiting in the car. Please come back soon. I don't feel well." 45 minutes. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot. The smokers outside the convenience store had gone, replaced by a young couple arguing loudly near a beaten-up pickup truck. An hour had passed when I finally admitted to myself what my heart had suspected from the moment David had walked away. He wasn't coming back. With shaking hands, I tried the door handle. It opened. At least he hadn't locked me in. I slowly swung my legs out of the car, wincing as my feet hit the pavement. Standing up was an ordeal, my body stiff from the long drive and lack of medication. Pain shot through my hip and down my leg, nearly buckling my knee. I managed to get out of the car, my legs trembling beneath me. The evening air was cool against my skin, raising goosebumps on my arms beneath the thin cardigan. I leaned heavily against the car door, gathering my strength. "Hey, lady, you okay?" The voice came from behind me of the young couple who had been arguing earlier. I turned to face a woman in her 20s with bright pink hair and multiple facial piercings. Despite her alternative appearance, her eyes were kind, concern evident in the furrow of her brow. "Too not sure," I admitted, my voice cracking. "My son. He went to pick something up, but he's been gone for an hour." The woman exchanged a look with her companion, a tall man with tattoos covering his arms. "Which store did he go into?" she asked gently. "He didn't," I said, the reality of the situation finally hitting me like a physical blow. "He went around the corner of the building and never came back." The couple exchanged another glance, this one laden with meaning I couldn't quite interpret. "Maybe he got held up," the man offered, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it himself. "Do you have a phone I could use?" I asked. "Mine doesn't have service here." "Sure," the woman said, pulling a smartphone from her back pocket. "Who do you want to call?" I stared at the device, suddenly realizing I had no one to call. David was my emergency contact for everything. My sister June lived across the country in Arizona and was battling her own health issues, COPD, that kept her tethered to an oxygen tank. Frank's brother Robert had moved to Florida after retirement and suffered a stroke last year. My few remaining friends were in their 60s and 70s, most with health problems of their own. None of them could help me here, wherever here was. "Maybe the police?" I suggested weakly. The woman nodded, her expression softening further. "Come on, let's get you inside the store. You can sit down while we figure this out." With the couple's help, I learned their names were Ava, and Marcusi hobbled to the convenience store and asked to use their phone. I tried David's apartment again. No answer. I tried his cell phone. Straight to voicemail. The store clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Brenda, watched with growing concern. "Ma'am, are you okay?" she asked. noticing my pallor and shaking hands. "I think my son left me here," I whispered, the words physically painful to say aloud. "I don't know where I am." "You're in Westfield," she said, looking increasingly troubled. "About 2 hours from Pittsburgh." Pittsburgh. We lived in Cincinnati. I was in another state entirely. My knees buckled, and Marcus caught me before I hit the floor. They helped me to a plastic chair behind the counter, and Brenda brought me a bottle of water. "I'll call the police," she said, reaching for the store phone. As I sipped the water, my mind raced. Why would David do this? What had I done to deserve such treatment? Was he angry about something? In trouble? Had I somehow failed him as a mother? I remembered our last few interactions before today. He'd come for Sunday dinner last week, but had spent most of the visit on his phone. When I'd asked about his job, his answers had been vague. When I'd mentioned that I was considering selling some of my jewelry to help cover my medical expenses, he'd suddenly become very interested, offering to take the pieces to a jeweler friend who would give me a fair price. Had I given him the jewelry? My memory was foggy, clouded by chemotherapy and pain medications. The store manager appeared from a back room, alerted by Brenda about the situation. He was a short, balding man with a kind face that reminded me a little of Frank. "The police are on their way, ma'am," he said gently. "Can I get you anything else while you wait?" "My medication," I said, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest that signaled the beginning of an anxiety attack. "It's at home. In Cincinnati." His eyebrows shot up. "Cincinnati? That's—" He stopped himself, but I could finish the sentence in my head. "That's at least 4 hours away." While we waited for the police, Ava stayed with me, holding my hand and talking softly about inconsequential things, the weather, her job at a local coffee shop, her cat named Pancake. I was grateful for her kindness, for the human connection as my world crumbled around me. Officer Ramirez arrived 20 minutes later, his kind eyes taking in my medical alert bracelet, my trembling hands, the confusion evident on my face. He was younger than David, probably in his late 20s, but had a calm, reassuring presence that immediately made me feel safer. "Mrs. Caldwell, I understand you're in a difficult situation," he said, kneeling down to be at eye level with me. "Can you tell me what happened?" I recounted the events of the day as clearly as I could. David's unexpected invitation, the long drive, his disappearance. With each word, the reality became more painful, more undeniable. "And you have no idea why your son might have done this?" Officer Ramirez asked gently. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "We've had our differences over the years, like any family, but nothing that would explain this." "Mrs. Caldwell, do you have anyone else we can call? Anyone who could come get you?" I shook my head again. "My husband died 3 years ago. David is my only child. My sister lives in Arizona and is battling her own health problems. I need my medication," I added, my chest tightening further. "It's at home." Officer Ramirez's expression grew more concerned. "What kind of medication, ma'am?" "Cancer treatments," I explained, "and pain medication for my arthritis. The doctor said I need to take them at the same time each day." He nodded gravely. "We'll need to get you to a hospital then. They can help stabilize you until we figure out next steps." As Officer Ramirez helped me to his patrol car, I looked back at David's silver sedan, abandoned just like me. It seemed wrong to leave it there, but what choice did I have? I didn't have the keys, and even if I did, I was in no condition to drive 4 hours back to Cincinnati. "The car," I said weakly. "My son's car." "Don't worry about that now," Officer Ramirez assured me. "We'll have it towed to the station. Your health is the priority." The ride to Westfield Community Hospital was mercifully short. Officer Ramirez called ahead, so a wheelchair and a nurse were waiting when we arrived. The emergency room was surprisingly quiet for a weekday evening, and I was taken to a curtained cubicle almost immediately. A doctor arrived within minutes, Dr. Sarah Chen, according to her ID badge. She was petite with a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of my oncologist back home. "Mrs. Caldwell, I understand you've missed some important medications," she said, reviewing the preliminary information Officer Ramirez had provided. "Can you tell me exactly what you're taking and when your last dose was?" I tried to remember the names of all my medications, the chemotherapy pills, the anti-nausea medication, the painkillers, the supplements. Dr. Chen wrote everything down, her expression growing more serious with each item. "And when were you diagnosed with cancer?" she asked. 6 months ago. Stage 3 breast cancer." The words still felt foreign on my tongue, as if I were talking about someone else's illness. "You've been through a lot," Dr. Chen said, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "We're going to take good care of you." Blood was drawn, vital signs were taken, and an IV was started. The hospital staff moved with efficient compassion, but I could sense their unasked questions. How could a son abandon his sick mother? What kind of person would do such a thing? Questions I couldn't answer myself. As the evening progressed, the police tried repeatedly to contact David. All calls went unanswered. They obtained our home address in Cincinnati and contacted the local police department there, but no one answered when officers knocked on my door. I drifted in and out of an uneasy sleep, the unfamiliar hospital noises and the weight of betrayal making true rest impossible. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw David walking away from me, disappearing around that corner, making the conscious choice to leave me behind. The next morning, a social worker named Ms. Thompson came to see me. She was a robust woman with silver-streaked black hair and reading glasses that hung from a beaded chain around her neck. "Mrs. Caldwell," she began, settling into the chair beside my hospital bed. "I'm here to help figure out next steps for you." The doctors had stabilized me, providing equivalent medications to what I took at home and treating the anxiety attack that had kept me awake most of the night. But the questions kept coming. Did I have a history of dementia? Was this the first time David had acted strangely? Did I feel safe at home? "I'm not confused," I insisted, perhaps more forcefully than necessary. "I know who I am. I know who my son is. I don't understand why he did this, but I'm not imagining it." Miss Thompson nodded, her expression neutral. "I believe you, Mrs. Caldwell, but we need to consider all possibilities. Has your son shown any signs of financial stress? Any changes in behavior beyond becoming more distant?" I thought about the new car, about his vague answers regarding work, about his sudden interest in my jewelry. "He might be having money problems," I admitted, "but he's never asked me for help. I would have helped him if he'd asked." "Sometimes people are too proud to ask," Miss Thompson said, "or they find other ways to solve their problems." A cold feeling washed over me. "You think he abandoned me for money? What money? I'm on Medicare and Social Security. Frank's pension barely covers the property taxes on our house." The house. The thought hit me with sudden clarity. Our house was paid off years ago, a modest 3-bedroom in a neighborhood that had become increasingly desirable as Cincinnati expanded. It was worth at least 3 times what we'd paid for it in the 1980s. "The house," I whispered. "My house." Miss Thompson leaned forward. "What about your house, Mrs. Caldwell?" I remembered now. Shortly after Frank died, when grief had made normal functioning nearly impossible, David had suggested I put the house in his name. "For estate purposes," he'd said, "to avoid probate when the time comes." It had made sense then, or at least I hadn't had the energy to question it. Had I actually signed the papers? I remembered a notary coming to the house, remembered signing something, but the details were fuzzy. I think David might own my house," I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Miss Thompson's expression remained professional, but I could see the concern in her eyes. "If that's the case, Mrs. Caldwell, we need to contact Adult Protective Services in Ohio. This could be a case of elder abuse." Elder abuse. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. Is that what this was? Had my own son, the little boy I'd nursed through chickenpox and helped with science fair projects, the teenager I'd taught to drive, the young man I'd supported through college, had he deliberately abandoned his sick mother in another state to get his hands on her property? I couldn't bear the thought. There had to be another explanation. Perhaps he was being coerced somehow. Perhaps he was in some kind of trouble. Perhaps. But deep down, I knew. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture too painful to look at directly but impossible to ignore. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice small. "Well, you're medically stable, but your oncologist in Cincinnati should see you as soon as possible to adjust your treatment plan," Thompson explained. "We need to find you a safe place to go when you're discharged, which will likely be tomorrow or the next day." "I want to go home," I said firmly. "I understand that, Mrs. Caldwell, but if your son does indeed own your house, and if he's responsible for abandoning you here, it might not be safe for you to return there right now. I hadn't considered that David might be at the house, that he might not want me to return. The thought of being turned away from my own home, the home where I'd raised my family, where every corner held memories of Francois too much to bear." The tears came then. Not the quiet tears of earlier, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook my entire body. Miss Thompson handed me tissues and waited patiently for the storm to pass. "I'm sorry," I gasped when I could speak again. "I just don't understand. How could he do this to me?" "People do terrible things for money, Mrs. Caldwell," she said gently. "Even to those they're supposed to love." "What about a nursing home?" I suggested, desperation creeping into my voice. "If he wants the house so badly, I could move into a nursing home. He didn't have to throw me away like garbage." Miss Thompson's expression softened. "Let's not jump to conclusions yet. The police are still investigating. We're trying to contact your son. There could be an explanation. But we both knew there wasn't. Not a justifiable one, anyway." The hospital chaplain visited later that day, a kind, elderly man named Pastor Roberts, who sat quietly with me, offering prayers when I wanted them and simple companionship when I didn't. His presence was a balm, reminding me that not everyone in the world was capable of the cruelty my son had shown. "God hasn't abandoned you, Eleanor," he said as he prepared to leave. "Even in the darkest times, you are not alone." I wanted to believe him. I tried to. But as night fell again, and I lay in that sterile hospital bed listening to the beeping of machines and the occasional footsteps of nurses in the corridor, I had never felt more alone in my life. The next day brought no word from David. The Cincinnati police had done a welfare check at my home and reported that it appeared empty but undisturbed. They'd left a note for David to contact them immediately, but so far there had been no response. My phone buzzed on the bedside tablet text message. My heart leapt. Maybe it was David with an explanation. Maybe there had been an emergency. Maybe it was from a number I didn't recognize. I fumbled with the unfamiliar buttons, eventually managing to open the message. "Mom, I'm sorry. I had no choice. Please don't try to contact me again." The phone fell from my trembling hands, clattering against the hospital floor tiles. My heart monitor spiked, its steady beeping accelerating into an urgent rhythm that matched my panic. A nurse rushed in, her concerned face swimming before my tear-filled eyes. "Mrs. Caldwell? Eleanor? What's wrong?" "What's wrong?" Everything was wrong. My son had abandoned me. He had apologized not for the act itself, but for the necessity of it. And now he was cutting me off completely. As the nurse picked up my phone and tried to comfort me, I found myself wondering about the choice David claimed he didn't have. What could possibly have driven him to such extreme measures? What kind of trouble was he in that stealing his mother's house and abandoning her seemed like the only solution? But mostly, I wondered what would happen to me now. At 62, sick and alone, where would I go? How would I live? Who would help me navigate the years of treatment still ahead? As I lay in that hospital bed, crying for the son I had lost and the future that had been stolen from me, I had no way of knowing that back in Cincinnati, in the house I might never see again, something was waiting for David, something that would change everything once more. But that part of the story was still to come. For now, I was simply a mother, abandoned and betrayed, trying to understand how the child I had raised with so much love could have left me with nothing but a text message and an uncertain future. In the days that followed, my world narrowed to the confines of Westfield Community Hospital. The doctors continued to adjust my medications, trying to replicate my treatment plan from Cincinnati with the limited information they had. My oncologist, Dr. Patterson, had been contacted and had sent over my medical records, but without seeing me in person, there was only so much he could do. My physical condition stabilized, but my emotional state remained fragile. I alternated between grief, anger, and disbelief, sometimes cycling through all three emotions within minutes. The hospital staff treated me with kindness, but I could see the pity in their eyes, could hear the whispers when they thought I wasn't listening. Can you imagine? Her own son. What kind of monster would do that to his mother? And she has cancer too. It's just heartbreaking. Each comment was a knife to my already wounded heart. I wanted to defend David, to insist there must be some explanation, but the text message had shattered that illusion. He had made his choice, and I was not part of his plans. On my third day in the hospital, Officer Ramirez returned with news. They had located David's silver sedan in the strip mall parking lot where he'd left me. Inside, they'd found a bus ticket stub indicating he'd taken a Greyhound back to Cincinnati the same day he'd abandoned me. So it was premeditated, I said, the words feeling like lead in my mouth. He planned to leave me there all along. Officer Ramirez nodded, his expression grave. It appears so, Mrs. Caldwell. The ticket was purchased online 3 days before your trip. 3 days. He'd been planning this betrayal while sitting across from me at Sunday dinner, while accepting the slice of apple pie I'd baked specially because it was his favorite, while promising to help me plant the tomatoes I'd been too weak to put in the garden myself. Have you been able to reach him? I asked, though I already knew the answer. If they had contacted David, I would have been the first to know. Not yet. The Cincinnati police have visited your home several times, and his apartment address that you provided. There's been no response at either location. Of course not. David was avoiding the consequences of his actions, hiding like he used to do when he was a little boy and had broken one of my good dishes. But this wasn't a shattered plate that could be glued back together or replaced. This was my life he had broken. What happens now? I asked. The same question I'd been asking for days without receiving a satisfactory answer. David stood in my living room, breathing hard. The locksmith had just finished changing the locks, and the real estate agent was taking photos of the house. Everything was going according to plan. We can list it by tomorrow, the agent said, snapping pictures of the kitchen. Given the neighborhood and the condition, I think we can get asking price. Maybe more. David nodded, trying to ignore the guilt gnawing at him. He kept telling himself he had no choice. The gambling debts had spiraled out of control. The loan sharks had started making threats. Selling my house, which I had signed over to him during a period of confusion after his father died, was his only option. He'd put me in an assisted living facility once the house sold. Or at least that's what he told himself. Just a few more pictures of the basement, and we're done, the agent said, heading for the stairs. Wait, David called out. I haven't been down there in years. Let me check it first. He descended the creaky stairs, flipping on the light. The basement was, as he remembered, concrete floors, wood paneling, old furniture. But something caught his eye. A metal filing cabinet in the corner that he didn't recognize. Curious, he pulled open the top drawer. Inside were dozens of file folders, each labeled meticulously in his father's handwriting. One folder was marked simply, David. His heart pounding, he opened it and began to read. The first document was a letter from his father to him, dated 3 days before his death. David, if you're reading this, something has happened to your mother. I've kept these records in case they were ever needed. I've always known about your gambling, the remortgaged house, the stolen jewelry, your mother's missing retirement funds. I've documented it all. I've also documented your mother's medical condition and her periods of confusion that you've exploited. There's a video recording of you manipulating her into signing over the house. I had a camera installed after the retirement funds disappeared. I've arranged for these documents to be sent to the district attorney if anything happens to your mother under suspicious circumstances. Attorney Wilson has copies of everything. You're my son, and I love you. But I will protect your mother, even from you, even from beyond the grave. Dad, David's hands shook as he flipped through the folder. Bank statements, photos, a flash drive labeled House Transfer Video, and a business card for Franklin Wilson, attorney at law, with a handwritten note, called 5/10/25, meeting scheduled. Today's date. The room seemed to spin. His father had known everything, had been watching, had set this trap years ago. His phone rang, breaking the silence. An unknown number. "Hello?" David answered, his mouth dry. "Mr. Caldwell? This is Detective Spencer with the Cincinnati Police Department. We're calling regarding your mother, Eleanor Caldwell." David's knees buckled. "What about her?" "She's safe, sir. She was found abandoned in Westfield, Pennsylvania. The authorities there contacted us." David said nothing, his mind racing. "Sir, we'd like you to come down to the station to discuss this situation. Also, there's an attorney Wilson here who says he has some information relevant to the case." The phone slipped from David's hand, clattering to the concrete floor. Upstairs, the real estate agent called down. "Mr. Caldwell? Is everything okay down there?" But David couldn't answer. In his mind, he could see his mother's face confused and afraid as he drove away, leaving her in that parking lot. He thought he'd been clever. He thought he'd found the perfect solution to his problems. He never imagined that his father, quiet, methodical Frank Caldwell, had anticipated this moment years ago and had set in motion a plan that would now bring everything crashing down around him. As he heard footsteps on the stairs, the real estate agent coming to check on him, David realized that his attempt to abandon his sick mother had led him directly into a trap he couldn't escape. In trying to solve his problems, he had only ensured his own downfall. If you're enjoying this story, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything, and sharing this video helps our community grow. Now, let's dive into this emotional journey.